An article from the Globe and Mail. Let's free ourselves of the US and forge closer ties with China. That sounds like a terrible idea. Yes, let's forge closer ties with the country that banned Winnie the Pooh after somebody compared him to the Chinese president. Non-binary RCMP official defends comments linking traditional values to extremist values. It's funny, the only extremist I see here is the one that can't figure out what gender they are on the given day. We also have Pierre Poilievre slamming Mark Carney for lying numerous times, not just about his conflicts of interest, but pretty much everything so far.
Thank you very much, everyone. It is good to be here today, once again reiterating that our purpose as Conservatives is to restore the promise of Canada that anyone who works hard can get a good, affordable life in a nice house on a safe street, that your success is determined by your hard work, not by government favoritism, that this is a meritocracy, not an aristocracy, where the government works for the working class, for the seniors, and for everyday people who build this country every single day. And that can only happen if the Prime Minister is focused on the public interest rather than on private interests. On Friday, we finally got a look at the Prime Minister's many financial interests that he kept carefully hidden throughout the election and about which he told numerous falsehoods during that same campaign. And so these are what the revelations tell us. One, that Mr. Carney was not upfront or honest with Canadians during the election. He made numerous false statements he would have known were false when he made them. Two, there is a cornucopia of conflicts of interest in these investments, like we have never seen before from a Canadian Prime Minister. Let me go through and document all of these claims one by one. First of all, during the election campaign, Mr. Carney said, and I quote, "I own nothing but cash and personal real estate, and that's not going to change in public life." Well, it turns out, while he said that, he knowingly owned 574 stocks and deferred profits and stock options in Brookfield and other companies. So it was patently and now provably false for him to say he owned nothing but cash and real estate. Two, my assets are now in a blind trust, so I don't know what exactly is in there. That too is false. He must have known what was in that blind trust because he was the one that filled out the paperwork for the Ethics Commissioner to report those holdings. So he knew exactly what was in his blind trust, and he just did not want Canadians to know before they went to the polls. Finally, he said, and I quote, "I do not have a connection with Brookfield Asset Management." Well, it turns out that he has continuing stock options and deferred share units in Brookfield Asset Management, and these options cannot be sold, or at least not easily, and we have no reason to believe they have been. So when he said that he had no connection to Brookfield, he was stating a patent falsehood. Now, why should we care? Why should Canadians care about this? Well, Mr. Carney has shown in the past his willingness to use his political connections in order to profit himself. For example, he said, let me see here, he gave public endorsement of Westinghouse in the leaders' debate. Westinghouse is a nuclear energy company which Brookfield is invested in. He has announced he's going to spend billions of dollars on modular homes. Brookfield is invested in modular homes. He says he wants to subsidize heat pumps. Brookfield is invested in heat pumps. He says that jet fuel, in the past he has said that he helped influence regulatory changes forcing aviation companies to buy certain kinds of jet fuel that one of his companies was invested in, so that air passengers have to pay more for their airline ticket to subsidize this specialty jet fuel that profits a company in which Mr. Carney had a financial interest. And the list of potential conflicts goes on and on. How can he possibly be involved in developing a budget when all the tax policies could impact on his investments directly or indirectly? How could he address things like competition policy when his companies might be impacted? Then there's, for example, the digital services tax. The digital services tax is paid by some of the companies that he is invested in, and therefore he has a potential or perceived conflict of interest in that as well.
Mark Carney also told us that we were under attack from the United States and that we should only buy Canadian in order to combat it. Well, we've now learned that a majority of his stock holdings are American companies. And this is why I've said time and time again, do not let the government dictate what you should and shouldn't buy. We live in a capitalist free market. You should be able to buy what you please whenever you please.
So, Conservatives are calling for two things today. One, we call on the Prime Minister to come before you and explain the contradiction. How is it that he was telling Canadians that he only had real estate and cash when he knowingly had stock options and other deferred benefits? How is it that he claimed he didn't know it was in his blind trust when we now learn that he knew exactly what was in that trust? And how is it that he said that he had no financial interest in Brookfield when he knew exactly that he had stock options and deferred share units? Finally, so we want him to explain why he told Canadians the opposite of the truth during the election campaign. Second, we're calling on the Prime Minister to sell his investments, turn them into cash, hand them to a trustee who can invest them in a way that is completely blind to him, so that he does not have any knowledge of what he owns. That is the spirit of a blind trust. A blind trust is meant to be something that the owner does not know anything about. That's what it means to be blind of the assets. But right now, Mr. Carney is clearly not blind of what he holds, because even we know what he holds due to this disclosure. And this will put him in an impossible position where he will be conflicted at every turn. So either he will have to get up 3 or 4 times every cabinet meeting to avoid stumbling over the 100 plus potential conflicts that the Ethics Commissioner has identified, or he will act in the cabinet to potentially favor his own interests. Neither of those possibilities is acceptable. And so, again, we call for him to explain the falsehoods, sell his holdings, end the conflicts, work for Canadians. We need a Prime Minister whose only purpose is serving the Canadian people, to reverse the massive damage Liberals have done, to reverse the out-of-control immigration, inflation, crime, debt, and our spiraling economy. And here we are, a Prime Minister who's going to be constantly distracted by his private interests when the public interest is in such desperate need of attention. Look at how bad things are in Canada today, and getting worse. The debt is growing faster under Mark Carney than it was under Justin Trudeau. Mr. Carney is spending more in his first budget bill, for his first financial bill, spending more than Justin Trudeau was spending. The deficit looks like it could be even bigger under Carney than it was under Trudeau. We have rising unemployment, a crisis of jobs for our young people. Housing is still unaffordable, and Mr. Carney has so far kept the unsustainable immigration numbers that Justin Trudeau left behind, numbers that are overwhelming housing, healthcare, and jobs, that are dividing our country and breaking up any notion of integration. We need a Prime Minister who's fully focused on undoing the damage that the Liberals have done, not continuing that damage and focusing on his private interests. Conservatives stand ready to help. We will propose amendments to the ethics law that will make these changes that I have just called for, make them law rather than just good practice. We want this to be once again a country where the leaders work for the people, where hard work pays off, where government is on the side of everyday people who work hard, pay their taxes, and play by the rules. Thank you very much.
For whatever reason, if Pierre Poilievre does not win that Alberta by-election, I do not want to see Andrew Scheer back as the intermediate leader of the House. Now, I'm hoping Pierre gets back in, but if you want my honest opinion, Scheer did a lot of nothing. And in terms of leading the opposition while in the House, where was he? He literally did nothing. We need somebody like Michael Barrett or Jamil Javani, because the opposition can sit there and scream and holler about this all they want, but at the end of the day, if they don't have a solid leader in the House, nothing gets accomplished.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre. Simon Tuck from National Post.
Hi, Simon.
You've had some time since the election to contemplate and think things over. Any plans to do things differently, either in terms of your team or your approach, anything like that?
Yeah, look, every election comes with lessons. We want to continue to work hard to reach out to people. We want people to know that, our mission remains the same. Our mission is to give people back control of their lives, to make this a country where anyone who works hard gets a good life, and that homes are affordable, our streets are safe, immigration works for Canada first. Those are going to be the things we focus on. At the same time, we have to ask how we can reach more people with that message. We know now, we ended up getting a tremendous result, 41% of the vote, an extra 2.5 million votes, but 41% might not be enough in the future. And so we have to ask, how can we expand even beyond that number and reach even more Canadians with our message? We need to present ourselves as a government of waiting. Yes, we'll do a great job of prosecuting as official opposition, but we also need to present ourselves as a government in waiting so that when the time comes, Canadians can feel confident in choosing us to lead the country forward.
Hello, Mr. Poilievre. Stephanie Levitz, the Globe and Mail. Nice to see you. Your party voted in favor of Bill C-5, and as I think you know, Mr. Carney has a meeting this week with First Nations leadership to go over their concerns with the bill. I wonder if you could articulate why you see the legislation as being respectful of Indigenous rights. You voted for it. And what, if anything, you think Mr. Carney ought to be doing to forestall, excuse me, the potential for protests or court challenges as this bill begins to be implemented?
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Let me first say that C-5's far from a solution. It's better than nothing, but not by much. The logic, there's a very big flawed logic in the approach the Liberals are taking. First of all, they've put in terrible laws that block development. C-69, the anti-development law, C-48, the ban on offshore shipping, the emissions cap, the industrial carbon tax. And then they've acknowledged that those laws are terrible, so they've passed another law to go around those terrible laws for select projects. This may allow some projects to go ahead. Some is better than none, and that's why we agreed to vote for it. We wanted the possibility that something, anything, could get built in this country, which is not possible under the bad laws the Liberals put in place to begin with. So I don't want anybody to think for a second that we think C-5 is a solution. The real solution is to get rid of C-69, C-48, the emissions cap, the industrial carbon tax, and many more of these other terrible Liberal policies. Then and only then will the hundreds or even thousands of projects that need to go ahead have a free market in which to do so. Now here we are in this strange situation where the Prime Minister has to select these projects to go ahead. Obviously, the best way forward is to win First Nations buy-in. And what I would say is the best way to do that is to ensure that First Peoples benefit from the projects. We had a policy during the election campaign, which I continue to support, which allow businesses to divert a share of their federal corporate tax to the local First Nations on whose lands the projects go ahead. This would be own source revenue for First Nations to build schools, hospitals, clean drinking water systems, job training, you name it. And they wouldn't have to go back to Ottawa to ask for money from federal bureaucrats. It would come directly to them. So I think that is one example of how we can make these projects beneficial to First Peoples. And they want to participate. If you talk to many of the First Nations people across the country, they desperately want to prosper from our incredible resources, and we should work with them to do it. I also think the Prime Minister should set up shovel-ready zones in consultation with First Nations governments that have pre-permits so that projects can go ahead and that First Nations people can be part of them from the very start. I think our First Nations people can be the richest in the entire world. That should be our goal. And only with good policy and hard work can that happen. Thank you. I just want to repeat that last part in English, because I forgot to mention it. You think of someone like Ellis Ross, who was the first counselor, the chief counselor of the Haisla First Nation. He helped put together the LNG Canada deal in northwest British Columbia that has a terminus at Kitimat, $40 billion. This is the biggest project in the history of Canada. ever. There's never been a $40 billion project. And that doesn't include the pipeline component, which is another 5 or 10 billion. And his people will benefit for many generations as a result of that. Let's take that model, let's spread it right across the country, and let's make our First Nations and all Canadians have the chance to become the most prosperous on earth.
Well, how about we start by stopping the categorization of Canadians? How about we just address everybody living in this country as so, Canadians? You sit here pandering to one group and the other, you end up pissing off everybody at the end of the day. Just simply be Canada first.
Hello, Mr. Poilievre, Ellie Canton Nantel with The Hub. During the campaign, I visited Western Canada and was honestly shocked with the level of frustration and alienation in Western Canada. You're currently running for Western Canadian seats. What do you have to say to people in the West who are so frustrated that they think that even if you were to become Prime Minister, given that you wouldn't be Prime Minister forever, it's better to just separate than to keep in Confederation because they just think Canada is so broken?
Well, I disagree with separation. I'm a Canadian patriot. I was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, and I understand the frustration. I still think that there's no other country in the world where someone of my modest origins would be able to make it to this place. And that's the story that millions of people have lived and relived from across the country. So we are united by that Canadian promise. But as I say, and I say it here and I've been saying for years, we have to put a final end to this notion that Ottawa tells Alberta to pay up and shut up. And that's what Albertans have been told by this Liberal government for a decade. Their frustrations are entirely legitimate. Alberta is the #1 net contributor, per capita contributor to Confederation, paying more in tax than getting back in federal programs. The major industry of Alberta has been under relentless attack for the last 10 years. The rural and western way of life is under attack with ridiculous gun bans, all while allowing repeat offenders to go and terrorize communities, including rural communities where crime is now, for the first time in a generation, a serious danger in communities where people didn't even have to lock their doors. So I say all of that to point out that the frustration is real and it is legitimate, and we should neither dismiss it nor deride the people who hold those frustrations. It's the job of all federal leaders and frankly all members of Parliament to redress the very unfair treatment that Western Canada has been receiving, and I pledge to do that. I understand it. For me it's personal. I was born in '79. It was a few years later that Trudeau 1 hit us all with the big national energy program. My folks were teachers, so they didn't lose their jobs like so many others, but we got smashed with the 20% interest rates on mortgages like everyone else. And I grew up understanding that the federal government had viciously attacked the Alberta economy. And so one of the reasons I got into politics was to bring fairness to my province and to my region. And we'll continue to fight for that by repealing the anti-energy laws, unlocking free enterprise, shrinking the size of the federal government so more of Alberta's money stays in the hands of Albertans, getting rid of the dumb gun laws and instead locking up the real criminals. That's how we redress the very real and legitimate frustration of Albertans, and that's how we unite all Canadians. One last thing I would say is, let's build alliances. Albertans should build alliances with Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who want to develop their oil and gas. They want to develop, our Newfoundland and Labrador cousins want to double their production. We should support that. Let's develop alliances with coastal First Nations who want to liquefy and export Alberta's natural gas over to Asia to get $14 instead of $3 for it. Let's build alliances with Greater Toronto Area communities that want an end to catch and release, to lock up criminals, or to miners in Timmins who want to develop resources or who want to keep their hunting rifles. That's how you get things done. Build alliances to get good results that serve Albertans and all Canadians. Thank you.
Well, it seems like we're honestly going to get nothing done because, once again, we're going to have to pander to certain groups, certain communities, in order to even suggest building a new project, pipeline, whatever it is. When you have to jump through so many hoops to get a certain result, you are simply bending the knee, and by doing so, you just create more bloat within said project. You end up spending more money on said project when you realistically didn't need to. At this point, I don't know what the Conservatives can do other than sit around and just do what they're doing. They continue to help the Liberals pass bills. They didn't bother to try and extend Parliament for an extra week while we are living in this air quotations crisis. Look, I'm glad we have an opposition to sit there and call out the government on all of their BS, but it honestly feels like that's really all they're doing. I don't know how else to put it at this point. Anyway, I'd like to know what you think down in the comments section below. Hit that like button, hit that sub button if you are new, and thank you very much for watching.